Okay. So today's session will focus on a topic that is very close to our hearts at the moment. We will talk about the crisis in the Israeli media, and in particular, what's currently happening with Channel 13, why it's so dangerous, and why we should all be concerned. This is a big topic, and to help us navigate it, we've invited two amazingly talented women who have a lot of knowledge and expertise in behind the scenes of the Israeli media. Before I introduce them, I just wanted to share and remind those who might not know that you'll know more about what's happening with Channel 13 after the session. But just so you know that we have a very important event, a protest happening in London this Sunday at 11 a.m. We'll share more details at the end of the session and then also send an email explaining everything. But just to say that it's really important to see as many of you there as possible. So to introduce our speakers, we have with us Dr. Anat Balint, who is a journalist and media researcher. She is a former Haaretz media correspondent and an inaugural holder of the Jeffrey B. Plavin Chair in Israel Studies at the University of Arizona Center for Judaic Studies. And Anat is joining us from the US. And from London, we have with us Gili Yuval, who is an author, publisher, and former journalist at the Haaretz Group. She holds a master's degree in culture, criticism, and curation from Central St. Martin's University of Arts, London. So Anat and Gili, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. And thank you, We Democracy, for organizing this Zoom session. Anat, we have a lot to cover tonight. And before we start, I must say that we've been in touch over the last few days, and your passion and knowledge of the Israeli press is so impressive and vulnerable. And I'm very happy that you will be sharing this with us tonight. I believe that the best way to start this session is to get a kind of an overview of the structure of Israeli media. So over to you.
Okay, hey Gili, thank you so much for inviting me, and hi everyone. I actually like it that we're in a somewhat intimate forum that is in between like talk and just a conversation. And I'll say that I like the thought of talking with London, because London is where I lived for quite a few years and where I did my PhD in media studies. And so there's a very soft spot in my heart, and London is my second home. So I mean, just enjoy the city, because it's quite an amazing
It means that we must talk about the weather now, but we won't.
Let's not talk about the weather, because we have so much more things on our plate. And we're in this moment of kind of acute crisis in Israeli media because of the recent appointment of clearly political figure, an arm of the current government, to lead one of the main news companies, the news company of Channel 13, and an appointment that is a clear signal of a political takeover on one of the most important news outlets in Israel. And we already see that despite the strict resistance, very firm resistance of the journalist, her name is Yulia Shamalov-Berkovich, and she already started to take steps that signal that she is there to serve the power and not the public. And so I want to say that I really salute to you for organizing this protest on Sunday, because I think it's extremely important. What I'll try to do in the next few minutes is give a little bit of perspective and context to understand why is it that citizens of a country, a democratic country in crisis, but a democratic country, should be alarmed by the takeover of a tycoon, one of the wealthiest people in Britain, sitting in London. How is one thing related to the other? And why is it important to stand against it and go out and protest? And I'm saying that without any hesitation. I think that's the right step to do at this moment. And I'll start with kind of the bigger strokes of saying something about the media industry, and not just in Israel. And I'm sure some of the attendees here are UK citizens and are not Israelis, so it's relevant to Americans, to British, to Israelis. I'll try to point out on two trends. The first one is that the traditional media, what we call legacy media, mainstream media, the good old journalism that we used to know for so many years, is in deep crisis for, I would say, already 2 or 3 decades. And we need to understand it from very powerful ventures, publicly and financially. The mainstream media turned into losing businesses because of the digital revolution. And I'm now really saying like big things just to kind of give the framework. Because of the digital revolution, audiences scattered, right? We call it fragmentation of audiences. Basically, in the most simple way, people went to so many other places. So the mainstream media lost the masses that it used to have.
When you say other places, you mean Twitter, you mean Instagram, you mean Facebook, social media, independent blogs.
It started before social media, but of course, social media made it so much more worse, right? Now, the vision was of those prophets of the internet was, oh, this is going to be fantastic. We're going to ruin the old media and we're going to democratize media and journalism, and everyone can say whatever they want. That was a optimistic vision that turned out to be pretty disastrous, as we know today. But the bottom line is that doing journalism became a very problematic business, as a business, a losing business, and therefore very fragile. And that is the one thing to put in mind. The other thing is that we see, and that is, you know, for quite a few decades now, is the rise of global business magnates. Okay, I'll say it again in a very simple way: super wealthy people who, because of the neoliberal turn in countries like the US, like the UK, like Israel, took all kinds of opportunities and became so powerful financially that they can impact the economies, the culture, the democracy of countries. Okay, so we see individual people, and Len Blavatnik is an example of such a person, right? A global multi-billionaire person who rose to power, in his case, on the basis of the privatization of Russia, right? So he's an oligarch who took advantage of the privatization of the national assets of Russia. There are others who came to such positions in different ways. So what we're talking about in Israel is really not just an Israeli story. It's the story of the UK. If, for example, if we go back to the phone hacking scandal of a decade ago, that revealed how Rupert Murdoch, you know, that was not big news, really corrupted the popular British journalism and brought it to criminal acts of phone hacking, right? To even victims of terror attacks and crime. Also corrupted the political arena and the police. So, you know, I can talk like hours about the phone hacking scandal because I think it's such a brilliant case of corruption, right? And the damages that one person can do. But that's, I'm just reminding, because the bigger story is the same story, okay, of how individuals can disrupt and corrupt democracies, especially through the media. It's the same story of Elon Musk now on Twitter, right? Taking over Twitter and implementing his radical libertarian ideology, or you can say no logic ideology, just a chaos ideology, turning Twitter into a platform of misinformation, disinformation, polarization, hate, and so forth. Okay. Can anybody stop Elon Musk from doing it, from buying Twitter and managing it the way he wants to? No. Is Twitter a global platform? It is. And we know that it has such a great part, a large part in promoting incitement and fake information. The bottom line is that media outlets became the toy of very wealthy people. And when I say a toy, that can mean different things. Some of them would buy media outlets because it's a good hanger or kind of power tool to advance their other businesses, right? Especially if they need all kinds of favors, what we call regulation from the government, okay? So for example, if you look at Len Blavatnik, he's the owner of the biggest cement factory in Israel, Neshel, okay? This is a highly regulated and polluting industry. And he is dependent on the Israeli government. So if he has a media outlet, which politicians need, that's a perfect thing, right? He can bargain, or he has the power position, right, to get the things that he wants. So one of the reasons for business magnates to go into media businesses would be that they need this power vis-a-vis the government. Others just want to promote their own ideology. If we look at Sheldon Adelson, who passed away, but this family is one of the families that are responsible for the empowerment of Netanyahu and the corruption of Israeli media by establishing the mouthpiece of Israel Hayom in 2007. If you ask me, I don't think that Netanyahu could get to where he got so far if he didn't have the very generous financial back of Miriam and Sheldon Adelson that sponsored a media platform that served specifically Netanyahu. And I think Elon Musk is there also for just promoting his ideas and just for the fun of it. So the motivation can vary, but it would never be the following. It would never be for serving the public, all right? It would never be accountable for serving the citizens, the public, and the role that ideally media outlets, especially journalistic one, should have in democracies of independence, of freedom, of ethics, of being with integrity and serving the need of the public to know what's going on, right? The need to stand against power, right? These are the pillars of journalism. This is the one thing that business magnates are not obligated to. Maybe they would choose to do it. Maybe, they wouldn't care enough to intervene and that would happen. But in most cases, as we see, their control over media has a very negative impact on the way media outlets function. Gilly, if you want to ask anything, or can I go on and talk about the case of Channel 13?
I'm going to interrupt you just for a moment. You can either answer it now or you can answer it later, because I think that it would be interesting also to look at specifically Netanyahu's involvement with Israeli media for his own interests, not, political, but also financial. For example, his involvement with Bezek and Walla, which used to be the largest news website in Israel, Noni Moses and Yediot Achronot, which is the largest newspaper in Israel, which was basically the competitor of Israel Hayom, sorry. So I don't know if this is something that you would like to, and of course, Channel 14, which is the only channel that Netanyahu would interview to. So if you want to touch on this now, or if you want to continue with the agenda.
Yeah. I'll say the following. We think now that Netanyahu is about not returning the hostages. We think now that Netanyahu is about standing on the side of racism and Kahanism in Israel. We think now that Netanyahu is about the judicial reform, right? And the attack on Israeli democracy. Let me take you to the start. It's all about the media. It's all about the media. And I can say it 5 times more. The destructive loop, all right, of Israel and Netanyahu, the disastrous point that we are at now. And it's very easy to forget because we had a judicial reform and we had a massacre and we have now the horrific things that happen every day, so we think it's about that. It all started with Netanyahu's ongoing attempts to take over Israeli media. And the way he did that continuously, with a lot of determination, was with business magnates, with very wealthy people who are willing to offer their services to the prime minister of Israel. So we had, and people in Israel tend to say, oh yeah, Netanyahu, he's crazy about the media. He cares so much about the things that people think about it, as if it's kind of a whimsical thing. These are clear signs of dictatorship, okay? Taking over the media is the first step, or one of the first steps, right? It's not a whimsical thing. It's not a character flaw. It's a strategy, okay? And it started with Sheldon Adelson and the 2007 establishment of Israel Hayom. And the Adelsons poured hundreds of millions of shekels into the losing business of Israel Hayom, which is a pure propaganda platform for Netanyahu, until they turned their back to him and until Sheldon Adelson passed away. And Israel Hayom is somewhat different today, but the damage was done. And then we had the thousands files, right? The corruption files of Netanyahu that are all about the media. So it's a repeating story of finding the patron, the sponsor, right? Who doesn't care about Israeli public, Israeli democracy, or any of that.
If I may add, also changing topics such as distribution regulation. Suddenly you have a new player in the field, and Israel Hayom can be distributed on trains or on bus station for free, and it's just changed the rule. And then it of course affects all the others, also in terms of advertisement budgets and things like that. Right. So basically he, I would say, disrupted or completely changed, and this was done in this case by a prime minister, by a politician.
Yeah. I mean, Israel Hayom changed, before I would say changed public opinion, because, who knows? It changed the media economy, right? It changed the basic rules of the game, because Israel Hayom was, I call it an irrational player in the media market. They were there not for the profit, but to disrupt the other media outlets that were problematic of themselves. Okay, nothing, and therefore they didn't care to lose money. They weren't there for the profit. They were there to take the advertising down, to flood the market with free newspaper. Israel Hayom is not a newspaper in my view, and to basically create a market that is not about competition or profit or making the best product, okay, but serving the prime minister. So we had Sheldon Adelson. Then we had the attempts of Netanyahu to take over the Walla online outlet, and it's one of his most solid criminal cases of File 4000 with Shaul Alovich and the whole give and take there. I don't know if we want to go into more detail there. Then he had the secret talks with the owner of Yediot Achronot. Again, an attempt of a takeover over what used to be the most popular newspaper in Israel, and a monopoly, problematic of itself. And the owner of this newspaper says, I'll make sure that you'll be a prime minister as long as you want, if you give me what I need to maintain my monopolistic status as a newspaper. And I want to ask you, where are we the citizens in this game? We're just the product that they exchange, right? There's no value to our votes, to our voices, in a reality where wealthy individuals who are not elected by anyone and a prime minister just do this kind of, bargaining over our attention and what we know. And so these are clear cases. Netanyahu got to the extremist point where he is today because of his attempts to take over the media, because he was finally, because Israeli democracy resisted that, and he was finally charged, right? And he has criminal cases, and he knows very well that if he's not in power, he will, high chances, who knows, may find himself in jail. So who cares about the hostages, right? Who cares about judicial reform? He will do anything in this situation.
Which
Do you want to ask anything?
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that this is now bring us to the I would say most current case of Channel 13. We mentioned Israel, and we mentioned Walla, and we can talk a little bit now if you can just explain. I don't think there is much to explain about Channel 14, which is basically Netanyahu's own.
I think it's important to mention Channel 14 because the same formula, all right, of aggressively changing the media landscape, engineering it so it would serve the person in power, happened with the case of Channel 14. Basically, Netanyahu understands that print media is nice, television, especially in Israel, especially among his kind of the lower socioeconomic groups in Israel, is a very powerful tool of influence. And he and his members of coalition pushed in a way that should still be investigated for the legislation of a new channel. And again, I'm not going to go into all the details of how it happened, but they find all the tricks in the book to make this channel kosher and become a broadcast channel. It's financed by yet another mogul, Mikhail Mirashvili, another outcome of the former Soviet Union and the privatization. So he's another oligarch who sponsors a platform that is worse than Fox News in the US. It's a pure incitement, spread of lies, incitement against the protesters, against the families of hostages. It's something that is totally foreign to Israeli society, but now it's there. Now it's part of the conversation, and of course, a very harmful phenomenon in Israeli culture, in Israeli democracy, which nurtures on a daily basis polarization, incitement, and hate, and dismantles Israeli society from within. So we have the story of Mikhail Mirashvili, and as part of his efforts to take over the media completely, he in 2016 talked to Len Blavatnik and encouraged him to buy what was then Channel 10. Channel 10 was the second commercial broadcast channel in Israel, with a news company that in a miraculous way at some point was created as a very strong, critical, highly professional news company, recruited journalists of really the top journalists in Israel, television journalists, and was doing a good job in reporting on television. And again, in Israel, which is pretty unique, the rates of watching television, broadcast television and news on television is still pretty high, unlike the US, and I believe that unlike the UK today. And so Channel 10, who later turned into Channel 13, it merged. There were two channels that merged. Was really kind of an example of, yes, we still have independent journalism. We still have, and of course, the model for it was Raviv Drucker, who is probably one of the most important journalists in Israel today, and very oppositional, doing investigative reporting on television, bringing very important stories. A lot of them are critical to Netanyahu and his surrounding. Just recently, he published an amazing investigating report on Miri Regev and her corruption in managing the Ministry of Transportation, and how she favors only those who support the Likud party and just neglects all the other cities and settlements in Israel. Here's the red flag. So Israel is a small place, it's a small society, everything is personal, right? For the good and for the bad. He's the red flag for the Netanyahu family. We know that the whole family, Netanyahu's wife and his son, are very, very obsessive about the media and follow it very closely. And they were trying to get back at Channel 10, mainly because of Raviv Drucker, but because of other critical voices like Baruch Ikra, like Matan Khodorov and others. They're trying to put their hands on Channel 10 for a long time. And we know that they used Yulia Shamalov-Berkovich, the new manager of the news company, to do that in her role as politician. She was actively working to prevent the merger of Channel 10 with Richest, something that was necessary for the market to have a better competition. And she was holding it back in her role as a regulator, something that is a blunt corruption. She failed eventually, but if you fail once, you just try again, right? And so now, instead of in her role as a regulator, they got her as the manager of the news company, although it's very clear that she came there to damage
Perhaps I should
company.
also mention that she is head of news without any experience in news. She used to own a Russian broadcast or newspaper company.
She has some experience in Russian media in Israel, but that was quite a few years ago. And since then, she clearly became a very instrumental tool for Netanyahu. And she's a loyalist, and it's clear that she's not here for the good of the company, and she's already taking steps. I would say another thing, Gili, before we'll move to more kind of a conversation. I've been covering the media industry in Israel for many years, and again and again, I was astonished why journalists do not organize and stand together in solidarity and really lead fights, whenever their freedom is threatened. And there is an inherent weakness to journalists in general and to journalists in Israel. And what we see now in Channel 13 actually gives me hope, because they really stand together very strongly in solidarity and are resisting this move. And I think it's extremely important. They refuse to collaborate or to cooperate with this new manager. They're protesting, and they're very clear, right? They're not like, oh, we'll see, maybe she's good. They understand the game, right? They understand what she's there for. And they stand strong
Aren't they
together.
afraid that this is a matter of time until there will be some cracks and they will start to
I mean the way these things usually work is that probably she would try to break the solidarity, right, to find the cracks, to promote those who are at the margins, or those who are are not as talented but can be loyal, and then the game is over. And so far, they're standing very strong together. They understand what's happening. They've been through a lot. And I think for that reason as well, it's very important to back them up, to support them, and to show support. The other thing that I would say is it's very important that business moguls like Blavatnik, who's an extremely wealthy person, and this channel is really pretty marginal for him, right? I don't think he cares a lot. Maybe I'm wrong. It's kind of a little bit of a noise in his much bigger empire. The problem is lack of accountability, right? He owes nothing to the citizens of Israel, to Israeli public, to Israeli market, nothing. All right. It should be personal. These people, the same way as the people who sponsored the Kohelet organization, should be accountable to the outcome of what they do. They spill money, which is nothing for them or not a lot for them. And the outcomes for the citizens, the millions of citizens of countries, right, are horrific. And therefore, I think, going personal and carrying the message is extremely important. That is my own personal view.
So if anyone else needed a reason to join us on Sunday, I think that was quite that. Anat, I'm sure that you're very close to many journalists, both on Channel 13, but also in other channels and media places in Israel. Can you describe from their experience? I mean, what are the voices that you're hearing? Is there hope, or do they think it's a matter of time? Do they think that if we will be able to move, or let's say that Blavatnik will pull off from the appointment of Shamalov-Berkovich, but maybe someone worse will come? I mean, could you describe a little bit of what you hear?
I'll say something specific about Channel 13. What happened there in the past 2 years that Blavatnik, and again, this is a dynamic that we know, has appointed some local people to run the business, to represent him. In this case, it's a guy called Anat Balint. These people are obligated more to show some outcome to the owner rather than to the company they run or to its role in democracy. And so many times they show failing management, and Dr. Topolsky led the channel in a really horrible, I'm not talking now about, democracy or political matters, just professionally, really bad. He changed managers every now and then. And so the channel generally is not in a good situation. Blavatnik poured, since the war started, 100 million shekels into the channel. So it's bleeding, right? He's losing money. And so the best outcome for Channel 13 would be that someone would buy it out, right? And someone that is not the messenger of Netanyahu. And that could be the best development. Because if they will take Yulia Shamalov-Berkovich, they may bring someone else who would be more of the same with a different name, maybe. And so the change of ownership, and I think Blavatnik, as far as I understand, would be happy to get rid of this toy, right? I mean, Netanyahu gave him like a business advice of, yeah, buy this channel. It's great investment. Oh no, it's not a great investment. And Ron Lauder has been to this story, and the Adelsons and others have been to this game of serving Netanyahu's needs, and then realizing that they just kind of got into a business that causes a lot of headache for them. I would say generally about the journalists in Israel it depends. Some of them are leading amazing fights, trying to function and work independently and report properly in a very, very, very difficult time to Israel. Others are working for outlets that are totally corrupted, like Israel Hayom, like Channel 14, and are really part of what we call the poison machine, right? Netanyahu's propaganda machine, and are basically no longer journalists, but part of the destructive powers of Israeli democracy. So it really depends on who you are, but generally I would say that journalists in Israel, because they don't earn a lot of money, because they don't have a lot of options, because their status is very fragile, right? It's a very insecure job. They are disempowered. They are not, although they are perceived by the public as very powerful because the government wants to present them as very powerful, right? It's the same as Trump, right? The media, you know, what they're doing, blah, blah, blah. But the reality of things is that the average journalist, and we're not talking about the talents like Raviv Drucker who earn a lot of money, but others are inherently scared because if they lose their jobs, they don't have a lot of options. And so, you know, how brave can you be when you worry about your next salary?
Your next salary. And also Israel is in financial crisis. It's during a war. It's not that you have many options. And sometimes you just think about your own survival, your own financial survival.
Yeah.
And sometimes this means that you have to make a lot of compromises. And I believe that this is, I would say, one of the most irritating things. I can say that as an ex-journalist, I was not a political journalist at any point, but there is a point when you just need to make a compromise, or you have to censor yourself because you don't want to hurt someone that you might need him, or someone who is an advertiser. And I mean, it's hard enough. It's hard enough even without that. So actually, I wanted to ask you something, and before I'm going to open this for open questions, but actually for something a bit more general, for you as a media researcher, a little bit about how can we help and educate media consumers to think critically. Now, it's not. I mean, I don't think we will ever be possible to go and speak to someone who watches Channel 14 on a daily basis and say, hey, this is fake and this is not. But I think we're all flooded all the time with news from very different angles and places. So I would say, what is your northern star as media consumer?
Okay.
I don't know if you can give like, I don't know, three.
I think I can. We live in a very, very problematic time. Not Israel is an example, right? For me, it's an example which I care about mostly, but we see the same problems all over of the saturation of our environment with information that is distracting, not reliable, inciting, right? So we feel like we cannot navigate our way. And so people, you know, some people find their ways, others just go into conspiracy theories or to the extremes, or we see all kinds of things that are really, in my view, an expression of confusion and loss of the way, right? Of like, how do I navigate myself in this? And some people just disconnect from media in general and become like, I don't care.
I'll let you drink. I mean, I'll just give an example. Like when your Shlomo Karhi, the Ministry of Communication, once where Raviv Drucker show was taking off, saying, finally, free press. Or if I may quote Miri Regev, who used to say, why do we need public broadcasting if we can control it? So if we see our governors using this terminology, it is quite difficult to take an example and develop critical thinking or critical consuming.
Or just remember the most basic things, right? The media is not for the government, it's for the public. It shouldn't be controlled, right? There is a lot of use of, by the government, very manipulative use of, we want to encourage competition, diversity. We want to open the conversation to many voices, which is actually a disguise of, we actually want to control, we want the media to serve us. And so there is, and so if you have some critical thinking, you understand this is just, BS, right? But if you don't, you think, oh, competition is good, right? They're working for to serve me, so we should kill this left-wing channels and open and so forth. About my advice, first, we need to kind of put it on the table and say there is a problem. There is a problem of information and navigating in the information. And we need to recognize it, and it shouldn't be on the shoulders of consumers, right? These problems should be solved in the longer run by governments and a much bigger scale of setting rules and regulations. But considering this is not happening enough yet, my first advice is there is no free lunch. Don't consume media that you don't pay for. Meaning, always prefer media that is subscription based, okay, not advertising based, not offered for free, because there's no such thing as free. But if you sign up for the New York Times or the Washington Post or Haaretz in Israel, which is a very good news outlet, because their business model is about serving you. I pay and you work for me, the public, okay? The second advice is look for independent media that is not owned by wealthy business people, but is a local grassroots organization of journalists supported by the public. So in Israel, this would be...
Will you elaborate on the seventh eye for a bit? So
So for example, a venture like, which I was part of, the Seventh Eye, which is a media watchdog in Israel, or Shakuf, which is like the umbrella organization now of Seventh Eye and others. 972 for English speakers, Sicha Mekumit, a left-wing, clearly left-wing politically, but an independent media outlet. The hottest place on hell, it's called. It's another independent media outlet. So all of these are alternative and good sources, and I think Haaretz is probably today the best news source about Israel. There's also Times of Israel, which I think is pretty good and still free, not subscription based. But it's independent and pretty good. So pay for your media as a general advice, not just in the context of Israel. Try to go either choose the one that you like, but the Washington Post is good, the New York Times is good, and so forth. Be critical. Understand that it's important to understand where do you consume your media. Who's behind it, right? What is the business model of this news outlet? Who are the owners? These are very high expectations, okay? It's not fair to demand from people to do that, but try to be aware of the context. And the other thing, that there is a lot of things running on social media, okay? Be very cautious, skeptical, and critical when you receive things, and don't rush to share over things, okay? Some people, very good people with great intentions, just say, oh yeah, this is so interesting, I'll just pass it on. And then I see my mom sending me all kind of Islamophobic incitement videos and all that sort of, and it's not her fault, right? The rules have changed so much. How can she know or pay attention or understand?
And it gets harder and harder to see what's news and what's fake news, or to understand the standards.
Yeah, and the last thing I would say,
but
the last thing I would say is that try to check things in a very simple way, right? If you see something that you think, oh wow, this is outrageous, Google it. Okay, Google it and read like 2-3 sources, or even say, is it true that, right? And look at 2-3 sources, reliable news sources, as the ones that I mentioned. See if they reported it. See how they reported it, okay? Look for the reliable sources as much as you can, and understand that it's not your fault. We are in a phase of a very problematic media landscape.
Would you recommend tip number 4 or 5, which is know your enemy, meaning watch those channel and newspaper that you do not support, just to see a way of thinking that is like, maybe in one day when you get into a dialogue, I know it sounds hypothetical, you will be able to know where the other side is coming from? Would you consider that?
There's a difference. Well, first, I'm not doing it myself. I have to tell you, I'm not spending my time. I know the arguments, but I'm not spending my time watching Channel 14 because I think these are very toxic environments. I am following some of them on Twitter and Telegram, but I'm not reading because it's a lot of noise. So I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it as such personally. That's my own opinion and my own choice. But it's really personal. I would separate between knowing the arguments of the other side, which is important. The question of the ceasefire deal is a big question, right? There are two sides here, and they're both like should be considered, right? But it's a whole different thing listening to incitement against families of hostages, right? They are trying to create hate, delegitimization, and violence, okay? So I would differentiate. Channel 14 is not a source of understanding counter arguments. You can listen to reasonable people in mainstream media, in respectable outlets, saying, well, maybe we should not go for a deal with Hamas. Maybe we should, right? This is something to talk about, right? But not to, my advice would be try to distance yourself from toxic environment. That would be my advice. Unlike what you suggested, but I think it's very personal. Maybe it's
I'm following your advice. I was just trying to see
okay.
what your opinion. Is there something you would like to add at this very point, or shall we open this conversation for a few questions from our participants?
Yeah. I mean, I think we said quite a lot of things, so I'm happy. I see here one question.
Yeah.
What can be done to mitigate control this from more severe case of Channel 13? A close is very much how can we make Channel 14 on the other hand has its core no matter what. It's like a loss. So Ritial Fibish is asking about kind of practically what's the best thing to do about Channel 13, and is it not a lost battle? I think that at this moment, resistance is the right thing to do. I think it's the must do. And it's very important as a signal, not only for Yulia Shamalov-Berkovich, but for any other media moguls that are trying to disrupt Israeli democracy, right? The resistance of the public is extremely important without even, I would say, thinking of, okay, what's going to be the outcome? We don't know what's going to be the outcome. The resistance of Israeli public to the judicial reform was the thing that allowed the Supreme Court to finally reject it, okay? So although people think, oh, what, we're going out to the streets again, it's meaningless, everything is lost, and I can totally understand it, and I'm there sometimes, right? Resistance, standing against these things in an organized way, creating coalitions of resistance is the only efficient way to stand against these powers that are destructive, right? They're not even ideological. It's a combination of all kinds of ideologies, but they're all against democracies, right? And in some way, I feel better. I'm in the US. In the US now, I'm teaching American students, and I feel that it's easier for me to talk about Israel because they experience the same thing with Trump, right? Does Trump have an ideology? He's an agent of chaos, right? He's just creating destruction, serving all kinds of purposes, not just one. So, who knows what's going to happen with Channel 13, but I think at this point, protesting, standing alongside the journalists and saying, we're not accepting this, and Blavatnik should be accountable, right? He doesn't care. It's far away. It doesn't cost him anything, right? But if these people, and we saw this model with the Kohelet organization, a number of brave Israelis were standing in front of the castle, whatever it is, the mansion of Arthur Denchik, telling him, the money you send over to these people is destroying Israeli democracy. Hello, we're knocking on your door. And you know what happened? And they weren't so many. He stopped sponsoring Kohelet because it cost him, right? What did it cost him? His reputation. Well, turns out it worth something.
Jenny, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, please. So Anat, first of all, thank you so much. This was really interesting and alarming, I would say. So one of the things that I experience as a person who organizes the event on Sunday is kind of this feeling of like people feel that it's not urgent, that there are a lot of things happening at the moment, which I completely understand. So this feels okay, yes, important, but probably not urgent enough. Other things are more important. So I was wondering if you could maybe explain why do you think it's urgent? And to me, I always try to really connect it how there is a direct link between what is happening now and democracy, and why actually without free press, we can't have a democracy. So can you kind of say a few words about that and maybe even describe this scenario of actually what will happen if if Israel doesn't have free press?
Right. I would say, even before going to talk about the big things of democracy and free media and all these things, and I totally understand the kind of, what do we need to do first? Is it the hostages? Is it the judicial reform? Is it the war? Is it, Israel's reputation? Is it Jews around the world who suffer from anti-Semitism? There's so much on our plate, and of course there are those who benefit from flooding us with, this disasters every day. I would say that the reason to go out for this protest that you're organizing, very, very quickly, I have to say, is because you have the opportunity to make a difference. And that doesn't happen every day. I think that a lot of the things seem like, oh, it's hopeless, or maybe it's kind of a longer term goal and so forth. But I think Blavatnik was never faced in his home base, right? Close to his home, with any criticism of his involvement with Israeli media so far, right? He remains kind of at the backstage, far away from things. What does he care? All these little people, the regulators and Yulia Shamalov-Berkovich and the journalists, does he know, what Channel 13 is really for Israelis? Does it really matter, right? It's about accountability. And I think you have here an opportunity to knock on his door and say, you're accountable, for your thing. The things that you do have an impact. We care about it. And here's the price for it. Because we're going to stand here and resist it. So I think the argument is that you have here, I think, an opportunity with a pretty small, protest to make a difference. Maybe. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my view. The other thing is, in a democracy, right, that is based on people making decisions about voting, about who they support, about what they agree to, right? Everything is based on information, on transparency and information, on understanding what's going on, right? And if we don't have these channels of information that allow us, that we can trust, so trust is the main thing here, that we know that we can rely on to give us not just the facts, a soldier was killed here, the IDF bombed here, this is just kind of facts, but give us information within a context of understanding these are the powers, this is what's happening, you should connect this and this to that, right? The bigger picture. This is really the role of good journalism, to give some context of what's happening and to be a counterpower to those who are in power. If the media doesn't have the conditions to fulfill this role in a climate of freedom, lack of fear, independence, integrity, you're done, right? Then citizens are victims of propaganda, manipulations, incitement, lies, all these things, right, that are exactly the opposite of what journalism should do. So journalism is not about being right-wing or left-wing. It's about standing against power. It's about providing reliable information. And that's why, people talk about freedom of the press, independence of the press, and so forth, because it's really the basic element for citizens to be participants, right? Rational participants in the democratic game.
Okay, we have a question from Moshe Teller. Thank you, Anat.
Well, thank you very much to both of you for being, very stimulating and challenging. I want to ask, what percentage of the media in Israel support the government? And why do they do it? Why, and what did he promise them? Thank you.
Before Anat answer, I will just say it's always a matter of who you ask. Over to you, Anat.
So what I try to encourage you in this conversation to do is not to think so much about the journalists as individuals, but to look on those who really hold the power, and these are the owners, okay? Because the ownership of the media really sets the tone to what kind of a media outlet you're looking at, okay? And I think it was Ben-Gurion who was smart enough before internet, before television, before, social media for sure. He said, in the Knesset, there's a very famous speech. He said, what is a newspaper? It's someone with money who pays for others to write what he thinks, right? And I always think, oh no, why do you say that? It's not true. Well, there is some truth to it in the sense of, if we look at the media map today, all right, you have those who are clearly media outlets that are pushed to serve Netanyahu. You have Channel 14, that is a very toxic negative element. And Israel Hayom has changed its tone to some extent, but we know that Miriam Edelson is a clearly right-wing. I don't think she likes Netanyahu anymore, but she's a clearly right-wing, a big supporter of Trump, supporting the annexing of the West Bank, for example. So this is yet another clearly kind of pro or right-wing media outlet, and without any, its journalism is nothing to write home about. They wouldn't do any investigative reporting. They wouldn't do any exposures. They wouldn't do any of that kind. You have some of the media outlets of the settlers, like Arutz Sheva, Makor Rishon, that is a religious media outlet. You tell me if I forgot anything. And then you have on the other side, Channel 12, that is supposedly okay, but in so many ways dependent on the government. And therefore, it became a norm in Israel that even the independent media outlets like Channel 12, like Channel 13, like the public service, they now have their own like Bibi representative, right? The voice of the government, like Ayala Hassan on the public service, like Amit Segal in Channel 12, like what was his name in Channel 13? I forgot. There was Sharon Gal and Ayala Hassan was there. So it became a norm that even in the seemingly independent or still independent media outlets, you have the voice of the government, which is, of course, a total corruption. It's not about bringing a voice from the right, which is, of course, legitimate and should be there, but it's really providing the space for someone who's just echoing the messages from the prime minister's office. That's a totally different thing, right? A lot of them are manipulation and spins and so forth. So I would say that within that, the media outlets that I find independent are Haaretz, which has a clear left-wing agenda, right? But I'm trying to separate between integrity and political view. I think Times of Israel, Zman Israel in Hebrew, is a pretty good media outlet. I think the public service is doing an okay job with a lot of fear. So there is a fear of the government aggression and sanctions, right? There's ongoing bullying, right? Will hurt your budget, will create laws, right? It's like a machine that works all the time. Even if they don't succeed, the threats are ongoing, and so there's a lot of fear. I hope I kind of managed to answer your question.
I believe we have another question from Avia Luis. You're on mute. Or if you want to perhaps type it on the chat and I can read it for you. Yeah, is it in the chat already? Okay, it's fine. Oh. By the time Aviel is typing, if someone else has a question, if not, I will say a few words.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Anat.
Hey,
I'm heavily invested in, heavily involved in the organizing of this protest, but I've been doing it secretly. I didn't tell the chevre, with a big pinch of salt, because our fantasy is to get Balvatnik to cancel the appointment and to win that battle, but that's in spite of what I see as the tragic, enormous betrayal of the Israeli media in the last 9 months, with in reflecting what we're doing in Gaza. I was wondering if what your view is on that.
Before I answer that, I would say that I answer with some caution because I'm not in Israel, so I'm not exposed. There's a difference between looking at the media at a distance, even if you follow things, than being in Israel and following the newscasts hour by hour, right? But it's clear that there is an inherent strong bias of not reporting on what Israel does in Gaza in detail, at close, from a humanist point of view, sometimes really marginalizing the information. So I would say it's probably not that the information is not there, but the way it's framed and at the extent that it's at the forefront and the extent that it's given like a human face. And of course, I'm with you on this criticism. I think it's a betrayal, not only because it's a betrayal to the Gazans and their rights for life and not becoming victim of this horrible war. It's a betrayal in Israeli public, right? Because again, Israelis need to be able to decide about their views and opinions based on reality. It's like putting something to cover their eyes and then tell them, okay, now tell us where to go, right? And they should be 2 feet on the ground. Some of them may think, well, we should, I don't know, kill all Palestinians because all Palestinians are Hamas. It's for them to decide. Others can say, this is horrific, we should stop the war. But the information fully flagged, right, with its human face, should be there. And one of the destructive outcomes is that it isolates Israel from the international conversation. Israelis find it hard to understand the anti-Israeli sentiment that is a story of itself and very complicated, right? But they feel like, oh, the world is against us, and we wonder why, while others are exposed to the images, maybe some in distorted ways as well, right? Maybe a lot of them are exposed to just Palestinian media, but it brings to a polarization of or separation of Israel from the reality in the world, and it's very damaging. So even if we don't talk about we have to look at Palestinian suffering, which I personally think that we have, morally have to look at it. But even if you think of the good of Israeli public, they have to know, they have to understand the reality in Gaza. And I think that Israeli media, for commercial considerations, because of the fear of the government, because of the dependence in regulation of the government, are very reluctant to do that.
Thank you, Anat.
Thank
I'm
you.
just conscious of time, but I do think that this was very important. I do want to encourage the participant here to continue this conversation in our discussions group. We have a Hebrew discussion group and English discussion group. I think that especially the latter was something which is very unique to us, either British Jews or Israeli who lives in the UK, and that we always encourage an open and honest conversation about those topics. First of all, I want to thank you, Anat, for this conversation.
Thank you for
And
inviting me.
I must say that we could all feel how
enjoy connecting
important
with London.
this
What?
topic is to you, and we felt it all the way from Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah.
So thank you. And I would like to thank anyone who joined us tonight. And just to say that if this matter is important to you, please come and stand with us on Sunday at 11 a.m. at the front of the Blavatnik building at Tate Modern. We need as many as you there. The weather is going to be nice, and we're going to do like a quick demonstration. It's going to be very aesthetic, I must say. And we do hope to get as much coverage as possible. And in order to get that, we really need you to encourage 1, 2, 3, 10 friends to come along with you and echo this message.
I have to say that some of my friends in Israeli media already heard about it, and
They buy tickets. They buy tickets. They're coming. They buy tickets.
No, they just said, we want to cover it. We want to, so they're kind of, oh, this is happening in London. I just got a number of messages. So well done to you for responding so quickly and organizing this. I think in my view, I don't hide it. I think it's extremely important, and it's an opportunity. You don't need thousands of people. You really don't need. You just need the determination, the right message, and I think you got an opportunity to do here something, and hopefully, someone will buy the channel from Blavatnik pretty soon. That would be the best outcome for channel 13.
Just one more rule of house, just to say that as per the request from the Met Police, we kindly ask you to come on Sunday and not to bring any Israeli flags or signs in Hebrew. We worked really hard to build a trustful relationship with the police, and we would like to respect that. If from somewhat reason you're unable to join, that's completely fine. We do appreciate if you would consider a small donation, as everything is really based on volunteers, and we're just investing time, sometimes money, a lot of energy. This is also my opportunity to thank the amazing We Democracy team, and you know who you are here. So thank you for that. Once again, I'm going to put the link just for the fundraising in case you would like to consider a donation. We would be very happy to continue this conversation over the discussion group or in any other channel. And I think we can call it a night. Jenny, correct me if I'm...
One last thing. Thank you, Gili. Thank you, Anat, and everybody who joined. And as I said, we recorded this session, and the idea now is that we can continue echoing the messages that were discussed here today. So everybody who has registered for the session will get a recording. You can rewatch it. You can send it to your friends, and let's spread the word and raise awareness. So thank you very much. I hope to see you on Sunday, and have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilly and Jenny, for inviting me.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Good night.
Bye.
Enjoy the city.
Thank you.